Welcome to this explainer, tailor-made for your Edexcel GCSE Psychology revision. Today, we're cracking open the case file on one of the most famous and, let's be honest, frankly bizarre studies in all of psychology. Yep, we're talking about Sigmund Freud's 1909 study of little Hans. If you're looking to totally master this topic for your exams, you are in exactly the right place. Let's run through our checklist real quick. We'll be hitting the aim, sample, and method. Then we'll interpret those wild dreams, dig into the Oedipus complex conclusion, evaluate the whole thing, and finally look at some alternative explanations.
Okay, part 1, aim, sample, and method. Let's establish exactly who and what we're dealing with.
So, rewind to 1909. Sigmund Freud takes on this incredibly fascinating case involving a young boy known to us as Little Hans. Now, Hans suffered from a completely crippling phobia of horses. Freud's aim here wasn't just to sit back and observe. He wanted to actually cure the phobia by dragging the unconscious anxieties causing it right into the open. The sample? Literally just one young boy, Little Hans, and the method was a case study. But wait, here is a massive catch you absolutely need to remember for your exam. Freud rarely saw Hans himself. Actually, almost never. Instead, Hans's parents, who, by the way, were already massive fans and supporters of Freud's work, they documented their son's development, his daily chats, his fears, the whole shebang. Then, they basically mailed that documentation over to Freud for his analysis. Keep that little detail in your back pocket, because it's going to be a real game changer when we evaluate this study later.
Moving right along to part 2, interpreting the dreams, which are the actual results of the study. Let's dig into the bizarre, qualitative evidence Freud had to work with.
To Freud, Hans's fear of horses wasn't really about horses at all, not even a little bit. He was convinced it was deeply symbolic, bubbling up from the unconscious mind. To decode this phobia, like solving a giant, weird puzzle, Freud zeroed in on the reports from Hans's parents. He specifically focused on 3 incredibly vivid dreams the poor kid had. Let's break down Freud's unique interpretations of each one.
First up, the missing mummy dream. Hans dreamt his mom was completely gone, just vanished, and he couldn't find her anywhere. Freud looked at this and said, aha! He saw it as undeniable proof of a profound, anxious attachment. To Freud, this revealed Hans's deep, unconscious desires for his mother, paired with a massive underlying fear of losing her.
Next, we have the famous and completely bizarre giraffe dream. So Hans dreams about 2 giraffes, one big one and one crumpled one. Freud's translation, well, obviously, the big giraffe represents the father and the crumpled one is the mother. Because Hans dreamt about taking the crumpled giraffe away, Freud argued this was clear evidence of Hans's illicit desire to take his mother away from his father. And this forbidden wish, according to Freud, was churning up intense guilt and fear inside the young boy.
Finally, we arrive at the plumber dream. Hans dreamt that a plumber came over and literally replaced his genitals with larger ones. And Freud's interpretation? He claimed this meant Hans was overcoming his castration fears. It meant he desired to grow up, be a man, and be exactly like his dad. Just your totally standard, everyday dream interpretation, right?
Okay, part 3, conclusion, the Oedipus complex. Let's look at the core theory Freud pulled from all this rich qualitative data.
Tying it all together, Freud concluded Hans was right in the middle of what he called the phallic stage of development, a period where a child's sexual interest focuses on the genitals. But more importantly, he concluded Hans was experiencing the Oedipus complex. Now, this is an absolutely crucial concept for your exam, so listen up. Because of this complex, Freud argued that the horse phobia was actually a displaced, symbolic fear of his own father. Hans couldn't mentally process this unconscious rivalry he felt with his dad, so his mind basically copy-pasted that fear onto horses instead.
Section 4, Evaluating the Study. Time to put on our critical thinking hats. If you want to score those top evaluation marks in your exam, you need to know this stuff cold.
Let's take a mental screenshot of the good, the bad, and the unfalsifiable. On the plus side, using a case study method generated unbelievably rich, in-depth qualitative data. And because Hans was mostly just chatting with his own dad, his behavior was totally natural. You could argue this gave us some highly valid early insights into how phobias might develop. But the weaknesses are massive. First off, limited generalizability. This entire grand theory rests on one single individual. We have absolutely no way of knowing if little Hans is typical of other kids. Second, the extreme subjectivity.
Remember, this isn't objective scientific observation. This is Freud interpreting a father's interpretation of his own son's behavior, and Freud barely even met the kid. Finally, it's unfalsifiable. We literally cannot scientifically test these claims about the unconscious mind for reliability.
Which brings us to Part 5, Alternative Explanations. Because Freud's concepts are unfalsifiable, we absolutely have to look at other psychological explanations for why Hans was so scared.
What if all this wasn't some complex, unconscious symbol? Let's look at the actual facts. Hans experienced a highly traumatic real-world event. He actually witnessed a heavy horse fall and collapse in the street. So through simple learned association, that initial very real panic just became associated with all horses. No hidden, deeply repressed desires required. And what about those crazy dreams? Well, the activation synthesis theory tells us that dreams are often just the result of leftover brain activity from the day. Your brain has these random neurons firing off, and it just synthesizes them into a weird story we call a dream. It's just biology, not some secret encoded message from the unconscious.
As we wrap up this revision explainer, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to drop into your essays. Since Freud's entire case study revolves around an unconscious mind that literally cannot be scientifically tested for reliability, is this study still useful science that gives us valid insights? Or is it just a really fascinating piece of history? It is a fantastic debate to bring into your exam answers. Thanks so much for revising with me. Keep practicing your application of these key terms, and best of luck with your Edexcel Psychology prep. You're going to crush it.